Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Maller Grotner Plummer Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Maller Grotner Plummer Attorneys, understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis, on the web at lawngp.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. Smithville, fiber internet, security solutions, and voice in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Bunger and Robertson, attorneys at law since 1949, utilizing experience, knowledge, and resources to help individuals and families recover in personal injury matters. Information at lawbr.com. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. Local governments are scrambling to deal with the projected loss of state revenue as a result of the new property tax law.
This is not our problem. It is a problem we are facing, a crisis we are facing that is not of our making, to which we are rising.
Monroe County is projected to earn about $37 million less in revenue over the next 3 years. The floodwaters from heavy rains earlier this month have receded. Now researchers are studying how these extreme weather events affect the terrain.
We're trying to tie this erosion back to its causes. Is it related to increased flooding? Is it related to land use?
Scientists say the increased flooding and hotter summers point to the impacts of climate change. And the Indiana State Museum has an exhibit looking back over the 5 years since the start of COVID. These stories and more right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Lawmakers ended the 2025 session early this morning by passing a new state budget that Republicans say takes care of Indiana's priorities and Democrats argue moves the state backward. Legislators were faced with a $2 billion revenue shortfall in the new budget. They filled it with a $2 per pack cigarette tax hike, major cuts to higher education and public health, and defunding things like public broadcasting and trails. House Speaker Todd Houston says the budget makes important investments in key priorities, including K-12 education, housing, and public safety. Property tax reform has been a priority of Governor Braun's administration from day one of this year's General Assembly session. But while homeowners and businesses will see some relief, local governments are preparing for potential staff and service cuts due to the loss of revenue from the state. As our Donnie Burgess reports, city and county leaders hosted a panel discussion this week on the potential consequences.
Senate Bill 1 limits the amount of property tax revenue Indiana counties can receive. Monroe County is projected to lose about $37 million over the next 3 years. That's according to the state's fiscal analysis.
Because the state legislators who supported SB 1 were too cowardly, and yes, I choose that word purposefully, to do their jobs, local governments are going to have to raise local income taxes to make up deficits. We're not going to have a choice.
The projected revenue loss has led the county council to deny salary or staffing increases for some departments.
And I think that's probably the biggest risk here is the uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. Until we have more certainty, we're going to pause any new job creations.
The city of Bloomington will have to take a hard look at essential government services. While a new local income tax is a possibility, it's unclear what form it would take. It's also unclear what social services would survive funding cuts.
We cannot do more with less. I can tell you that my administration has been laser focused on making sure that we are running a really efficient government.
In a county that already struggles with affordable housing and wage disparity, it faces another problem that could become worse if staff and services are cut.
Big concern for me, which is a decrease of population happening right now in Monroe County for the first time in our history. We're losing population, particularly population of working age people that will pay local income taxes.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Donnie Burgess.
Thompson urged residents and community leaders to keep talking and to express ideas on how to combat revenue loss. Governor Mike Braun will have a full control over Indiana University's Board of Trustees under a last-minute provision passed at the State House. Braun can now remove trustees elected by alumni and handpick their replacements. Currently, 3 out of 9 IU trustees are selected by alumni. I'm joined now by WTIU's Ethan Sanwise for more about the changes to higher education enacted by the General Assembly. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. So I'm hearing a lot of people talking about these changes to the Board of Trustees in particular. For people who aren't familiar with the board, they basically run the university. They're the ones who are making new policies and making decisions about the budget.
So if the governor already appoints 6, then why remove 3?
Well, Governor Mike Braun said yesterday that he was feeling dissatisfied with the way that the university is being run, but he didn't provide a whole lot of details.
I want to get a board there that is going to be maybe a little more rounded, that's going to produce better results.
The thing is, elected trustees almost always vote with the majority, so it's not clear to me that they affect whatever results Braun is referring to. It's really only one elected trustee who's been a regular voice of dissent, and that's Vivian Winston.
I think it's a loss to the alumni because their voice is not as represented. Whether or not their voice made an actual difference, at least they had a voice.
There's 3 other changes. The one I say is even more significant than the changes to the board is a new review for all tenured faculty to make sure they meet certain productivity guidelines or lose their jobs. Basically, that gets rid of most of Indiana's remaining tenure protections. When the State House proposed changes to tenure last year, it appeared as a separate bill, and there were weeks of debate. By contrast, this change appeared overnight in a conference committee. There really wasn't any discussion.
And I see there's language in there about faculty governments as well.
That's one of the most puzzling things about this legislation, Joe. It makes very specific changes to faculty government that it's hard to imagine why anyone outside the university would really care about. For one, it bans professors emeritus from service on the faculty council. Those are retired scholars who get to keep their titles. But I can't imagine why anyone in the State House would worry about that. The changes also stop faculty councils from passing new policies. From now on, their actions are advisory only. It takes away a lot of the leverage that professors used to have on campus.
All right, Ethan, thanks so much for your reporting. I know you're going to go back and you're going to have a whole web story for us later today, right?
That's right.
Yeah, thanks so much. The city of Bloomington is revoking occupancy permits for 11 of about 34 properties owned and run by Jeff Jones of Pendragon Properties, a rental company in Bloomington. As Benta Boutier reports, the city attorney sent notice to Jones on Friday of permit revocation and loss of further rental licensing privileges for rental code violations.
A letter from a Bloomington attorney to Pendragon says if it continues to use the 11 properties as rentals past June 1st, it will be subject to a $2,500 fine per day for each violation. Bloomington Mayor Carrie Thompson says during recent city housing and neighborhood development inspection of Pendragon properties, the city found multiple code violations and unsafe living conditions. She went to these properties to talk with residents about action the city is taking.
100% of the doors that were answered when I was out knocking said, we have been looking to get out of this lease. This is such a terrible place.
Thompson's assembled a team of housing providers and others that met this week.
In case we do find that people become unhoused, but it's not our expectation that that will be the situation.
Pendragon Properties have had issues with rental code compliance for years. A city spokesperson says Pendragon has approximately 23 other properties. The city does not plan to renew the rental permits for any of these once they expire, and Jones will not be allowed to operate residential rental housing in Bloomington. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Benta Boutier.
Jones did not respond to requests for comment. 2 of the 11 properties that Pendragon will lose a permit for in June are run by Malibu House, a local sober living business. Thompson says the city explored what it could do about Malibu House, specifically after WTIU's reporting this year. Well, we're joined now by Olivia Wilson for more headlines from around the state. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me. Terre Haute is introducing a 10-year plan to develop its riverfront into a recreational destination. The plan includes building neighborhoods, expanding trails, and reserving public space by the banks.
I would say that vision came, honestly, traveling outside of Terre Haute, seeing what other Hoosier communities and Midwest communities have invested in their river, whether that's Owensboro, Kentucky, Evansville, or Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Financial hurdles could complicate Terre Haute's vision. Budget cuts at the state and federal level are constricting the sort of grants relied upon for public projects.
It's fallen on cities and mayors to go out and sell their community, to grow their community, and that's exactly what we're doing right here in the city of Terre Haute.
Sackbun says he's prepared to diversify sources of funds, such as using developer-backed TIF bonds and grants from private organizations. Indiana's state parks are expected to face a loss of $10 million in state funding once the budget is finalized. That's after lawmakers adjusted the budget so that more than 90% of the park funds would come from visitor fees, which are for entrance, camping, and the pool. In the past, about 2/3 of Indiana state parks' operating budget came from fees.
And I think that may have given a false sense to the budget makers that they could rely on DNR fees continuing to increase. They leveled off.
Goss says without more funding, the parks likely won't have as much money to hire the seasonal workers they rely on to do things like clean restrooms, mow lawns, serve as lifeguards at park pools, and collect entrance fees. The Bloomington Convention Center hotel developers are ready to investigate whether their chosen site is the ideal home for the hotel. The City Redevelopment Commission unanimously approved Adora's hospitality request to spend up to $100,000 to examine the former Bunga-Robertson property north of the current convention center.
The worst thing you can hit is rock or water, and I seem to hit both of them every time I develop a hotel. But we understand there's going to be rock here, but we'd like to understand the length of it.
Louderback expects the property analysis to take up to 2 months to complete. The city of Bloomington celebrated the opening of Hopewell Commons, the city's newest park, Wednesday afternoon. The 1-acre park is part of a bigger effort to redevelop the former site of the IU Health Bloomington Hospital into a new neighborhood with affordable housing. The park includes outdoor seating, picnic tables, and AstroTurf. Temporary pickleball courts will eventually be moved for housing.
That's what this park is. It's our first hello. It's open arms. It's an invitation to come in and stay a while. We're building homes here, of course, but also businesses, public art, walking paths, spaces like this one. Places that invite us to gather, to breathe, and to belong.
Development in the area surrounding Hopewell Commons is expected to begin later this year. Bloomington Mayor Carrie Thompson has proclaimed June 27th as the first Godzilla Day. Thompson says the city wants to honor the original uncut 1954 Toho Studios film that will be screened at the Buskirk-Chumley Theater that evening. The version of Godzilla familiar to most Americans was recut by distributors for American audiences.
It's a little bit more gritty, and it really talks about the realities of what had happened during the war and the atomic bombing.
And Joe Bredlow says that she's still looking for ways to expand the event, like getting permits for public art projects and partnering with local businesses.
Sounds fun. I know a lot of people excited about that.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Olivia.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. The Indiana State Museum has been collecting artifacts for its exhibit documenting the impact of the COVID pandemic. And scientists are studying the effect on the terrain from this month's extreme flooding across the southern part of the state. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
I have some glad tidings to impart.
Whoa! Look at that!
I'm still surprised at how good I am.
Jane Austen was my sister.
I didn't think I would ever study medicine, but here I am.
Absolutely delicious, especially straight out of the oven.
I've never seen anything like this.
I think we have sufficient cause for celebration.
1, 2, 3.
A change is happening.
Let the groove take over.
Which is perfect.
The age of discovery is now.
When you hear it, you know what it is.
I am quite overwhelmed.
It's a joy to be in this world.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Well, 5 years have passed since the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country, upending the lives of millions. Reporters Isabella Vesperini and Elise Perry visited local businesses and the Indiana State Museum to learn more about the pandemic's lasting effects.
The Briar and the Burley Luggage and Tobacco Shop on the square was deemed a non-essential business. It was closed for 8 weeks to the public and could only ship products.
We would just come in and sit here and see if the phone rang, and that was about it.
The owner spent $80,000 of his savings to keep the 9 employees paid and the lights on. Closing down permanently was a concern.
The thought crossed my mind. I mean, if you can't be open to the public and you have all this merchandise and bills to pay, you've got essentially no source of income. Sooner or later, you know, we managed to survive.
They sold fewer pieces of luggage in a year than they normally would in a week. Between January and October of 2020, international tourism dropped 70%.
When people were finally able to get out and move around and shop again, that we got busier. That people, especially when people started traveling again, they kind of seemed to do it with a vengeance. It's like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not staying here.
The pandemic caused Gather, an independent handmade goods shop on the square, to undergo structural changes. Even though plastic shields various feet tall were installed in front of the counter to keep people distant from each other, they still found a way to connect with their customers.
We have a bunch of people who craft around Bloomington, and so a bunch of the crafting people really came through as a community to make a bunch of masks for everyone and to help have them here at the store so everyone had easier access to them, and also it really helped out our small business a ton.
Halliday moved back in with her parents in Indianapolis right as the pandemic hit. She didn't like staying inside all the time, but still took something away from her experience.
My girlfriend lived here, and then she would come and see me in Indy anytime that she could, and she still had a full-time job. She was a preschool teacher, so she's an essential worker. And yeah, I remember that time was super hard, but I'm always so thankful that she was there for me. And now we're married.
During the pandemic, the Indiana State Museum started a COVID collection. Pieces from the collection rotate through the museum's Global Indiana exhibit every few months.
When COVID happened, the museum staff recognized immediately that we needed to collect materials from this critical moment in history.
The museum has few artifacts from the 1918 influenza epidemic, so the museum employed a rapid response strategy in collecting COVID artifacts. Many of the pieces in the museum's collection came from staff members and their family and friends.
We made it a priority to collect these materials so that we would be able to collect this moment in history, that we would be able to share things from the everyday, but also how we reacted to this moment.
The collection includes hand sanitizer, masks, and nursing materials alongside political, educational, and sports pieces.
Everything that we received helped us to tell a story of someone who was working hard to make it through the pandemic, and then also the ways that they were reacting, how they were using creativity to celebrate.
Tandy highlighted a dress students between kindergarten and second grade made for Katie Portia, an art teacher from Danville North Elementary School who won Teacher of the Year in 2020. The students also made her a matching pair of shoes, purse, and earrings. Portia wore the ensemble to meet President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden to be recognized for the award in 2021. The museum is continuing to collect COVID artifacts to preserve history for the future.
We want to make sure that we're not only collecting for now, but for 100+ years from now.
For Indiana Newsdesk, with reporter Elise Perry, I'm Isabella Vesperini.
Floodwaters from the White River have finally receded below flood stage after heavy rains brought it surging into communities and farmlands. And for one research team at IU, the work is just beginning to understand how these extremely rare 50-year floods affect Indiana's terrain. Clayton Baumgarth has more.
It's a sunny afternoon in a field just south of Columbus. Students are out gathering sensors and scanning the area using a drone.
This flood in particular helps us
quantify exactly how a 50-year flood affects floodplains and the deposition and erosion of sediment here, and exactly how much just the one flood affects this.
O'Hara is a master's student at IU. Typically, he studies how smaller floods affect floodplains over a decade at a time. But this 50-year flood provided a rare opportunity.
The area behind me on this floodplain, I'd say about a third of it has experienced over a foot of erosion in the past decade, and that's pretty significant. And we're hoping to compare just the one flood event to see, what kind of portion of that could be from one event.
Just days before the waters rose, O'Hara and some undergraduate students rushed to this field to stake sensors in the ground for measuring water depth. They also flew a drone with a sensor attached that measures ground elevation.
Each of those pulses of light gives us an exact measurement to the ground and any point that it hits. And with that data, we can make a lot of measurements. It's extremely valuable to a lot of different kinds of research.
They'll be able to use that data to determine if the flood eroded or deposited soil from the plain. Right away, it was clear to the team that the floods brought a hefty layer of sand into the field. The lab thinks that could be a good thing.
That sediment can get worked back into the topsoil, restore some balance to the topsoil, maybe provide some nutrients. That's certainly an interesting possibility.
Edmonds says these floods are part of a historical trend that goes all the way back to 1927.
If you look at those trends over time, the annual maximum flow has been increasing pretty steadily since then. It's been going up, and so the implication of that is that there are more frequent and bigger floods year after year.
This floodplain in particular is of interest to Edmonds because while there are clear deposits from the White River, other areas of the field are eroding away.
We're trying to tie this erosion back to its causes. Is it related to increased flooding? Is it related to land use? Is it related to farmers' planting habits or patterns? Ultimately, we want to try to help the farmers and the people of Indiana to try to conserve soil because it's an important natural resource.
Edmonds is hoping to better inform farmers about utilizing floodplains across the state. Though sediment deposits have the potential for creating more nutritious soil, other scientists say that isn't always the case.
There are some benefits from those sediments. If all of our waterways were perfectly clean and free of industrial chemicals and things like that. So, there is a little bit of risk of water quality whenever you are dealing with floodwaters.
This flood came at a good time for farmers. It's still a bit too early to plant most crops in the southern portions of the state. But by the time major puddles and ponds dry out of the fields, farmers will be left with a healthy, moist soil to get their corn and soybeans into.
Those excessively wet conditions aren't healthy for the plants either. So our corn and soybean crops really can't germinate under saturated conditions, and so you might have complete failure of seed emergence.
For Bowling, this time of year isn't when most farmers worry about their crop yields at harvest.
Increasingly, we also worry about peak summer temperatures and the timing of pollination relative to when we have some of our hottest nighttime temperatures can influence corn yield in particular.
She says the increased amount of flooding Edmonds noted in his research, as well as the hot summers, all point to one big problem.
And that is the signal that we're seeing with our climate changes.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Clayton Baumgarth.
Edmonds says preliminary analysis of the floodplain surface changes in the study area showed the flood caused more erosion than deposition. Today marks the start of the world's greatest college weekend, but it's not all about the men's and women's Little 500 bicycle races. As Kitty Spack reports, one student organization puts on a race that isn't quite as competitive.
It's called the Little 499. The lighthearted event races in teams similar to the Little 500, but there's a twist. The teams ride on children's tricycles. The race around the Showalter Fountain is a new lighthearted tradition, but it was inspired in part by an older IU event. Before women could compete in the Little 500, they would instead compete in the Mini 500. Similar to the 499, the event was raced with tricycles. The Mini 500 was held for nearly 50 years. As the Little 5 women's race got established, the Mini became more lighthearted, similar to the 499 race. Some riders know the history, like the Cinzano team.
I know it was the precursor to the women's Little 500. They didn't do the same race as the men's prior to 1990 pretty much.
Others show up to partake in the school spirit. That's exactly what the Union Board hoped for when they planned the event. This year it was held in tandem with IU Day, the university's spirit day for fundraising.
Training is not required. Everyone can join and race and have fun. It's just a really cool thing to do.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Katie Spack.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Maller Grotner Plummer Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Maller Grotner Plummer Attorneys, understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis, on the web at lawngp.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. Smithville, fiber internet, security solutions, and voice in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Bunger and Robertson, attorneys at law since 1949, utilizing experience, knowledge, and resources to help individuals and families recover in personal injury matters. Information at lawbr.com. And by WTIU members. Thank you.